Today I'm going to show you how to do couching on the Janome M17. Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson-Hurst of Chatterbox Quilts, and couching can add a really fun embellishment to your projects. So as you can see here, I have a project where I've done some couching on it. I stitched in the ditch first. I did some quilting first before I added this to it, but going through the 3 layers actually quilts as well. You can see the back here as well. So I want to talk a bit first about what foot you need to use for this. So there is a free motion couching foot set. It's such a mouthful, I can't even say it, that you can get that works with this machine and other Janome models. And I'll go into more detail about it in a minute, but this is the foot I'm using. So you also need to choose yarn or decorative threads to use when you're couching. So here's some examples. So you could use yarn, and I'm going to be showing you an example with that. You can also use other decorative threads like Accent. This is from Wonderfill. Or they have this as well, which is called Razzle. So you can see how they're a little bit thicker, right? This one's a little bit thicker than that particular one. This one will actually run through your sewing machine, but this one would, well, might be a little difficult to do that. Then there's also Sizzle, which is like a metallic. So that's very luscious. And then there's something like this, which is, I'm not exactly sure what exactly this is. It's like, well, it's thicker than thread. It's kind of like a yarn, but it's smoother. So there's different decorative items you can use to couch down on your projects that give it some extra bling and give it some texture as well. So let's go to the sewing machine next because I want to explain more about the foot and about how to do the couching. So let's take a closer look at the free motion couching foot set. So you'll notice that the foot itself, the attachment that goes on the machine, kind of looks like a free motion quilting foot. But there are these 2 acrylic feet. So I have foot 2 on, and there's also foot 1. Now the differences are the size of the hole. It's probably difficult for you to see, so you'll just have to trust me on that. But number 1 is for threads that are heavier, okay? And there's only a certain amount of thickness you're going to be able to put through these, and I'll show you how to check to see if it's going to work or not. And foot 2 is for thinner ones, and that's the one I'm using today. It's going to work with this yarn I'm going to show you in my sample. Now, I'm going to show you just a sample, and of course you always want to practice this first, but stick with me because at the end of the video I'm going to show you another example, and I'm going to show you how and what you can use to get really nice shapes when you are couching on your projects. Okay, so let me put this out of the way for now, and let me put the other foot out of the way. And I want to talk about how to install this on the machine. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. However, you need to be running through whatever you're going to be couching. So it could be, you know, as I showed you already, some of those decorative threads or yarn. I'm going to use yarn as an example. But whatever you're using, it's, I find anyway, easier to actually attach that decorative thread or yarn first before you put the machine, or the foot, I should say, on the machine. So there is a little bit of a groove here. You can see this little bit of a groove, and that's where your decorative yarn or thread is going to ride. And then you need the front part, the loose end, is going to go into the foot, okay, like that. So it's easier to do this than put it on the machine than it is to already have this on the machine and try and wiggle this yarn in through the back. Okay, so I'm going to put my yarn over here. We're going to go over to the machine now and attach the foot. So when I'm doing this, I want to make sure I keep the yarn out of the way. If you find you put it on and it's gotten stuck in there, you just need to take it off and do it again. So we're going to put that on. We always want to tighten our foot so it doesn't wiggle and fall off. Okay. And I've got that in. So I told you I would show you a couple things. First off, making sure that that yarn's not caught. I can see that's great. Also, by doing this, by just going back and forth a bit, I can tell that this yarn that I'm using, is going to work. Right? Okay, so if, for example, it was not caught at the back here, so let's say I could pull it forward, but I couldn't pull it through here, that means that yarn is too thick. It's not going to work, okay? So you don't want to use it. Now, I haven't talked much about the machine setup itself. So first off, you want to have the zigzag foot in because you're going to be using a zigzag stitch. It's going to go back and forth, right? I've got the free motion or blue dot bobbin case in. That's a lower tension case in my bobbin area because this is really free motion quilting, but we're couching something down at the same time with a zigzag stitch. But anyway, you want to make sure you got the blue dot bobbin case in there. zigzag needle plate. Of course, we know which foot we've got attached. What about machine settings? Well, let's talk about those next, shall we? You want to make sure you're in your home screen. You're going to go into the sewing application mode, and you're going to pick the choices on the far right. It's a plus with a little foot. Okay, that gives you some of the areas that are optional accessories you may need to buy for your machine. And you can see if I go to the second page that I have the free motion couching available to me. So there's two of them. There's zigzag stitch 1 and 2. So you pick the appropriate one depending on which foot you've got attached. We've got 2 attached, so I'm going to FMC 2. So that is all set up. It has a tension of 4 and a width of 1.5 already. So that is perfectly fine, and we're going to stick with that to start anyway. You always want to go with the default settings and see how it works. And of course, you always want to practice first before you go to your actual project. So I'm just going to pull this quilt sandwich in here, and we're going to do a bit of practicing. So I got a little bit of the yarn out front, not to worry about that. I'm using a regular purple quilting needle, the Janome purple quilting needle. And I should just mention on the M17 here, there are different ways to do this couching. This is one way you can do it. There's another way you can do it using the embroidery unit, but that's a different topic for another video. All right, couple things to note. You want to make sure that you pull the yarn off. You do not want the yarn to get taut. So I'm just going to pull my ball of yarn over for a second and pull off a bunch of yarn. You're going to keep it up close to the needle area, but you never want this to get taut. Okay, it's going to cause distortion, it's going to cause problems. All right, so that's just staying right nice there. And then I'm just going to start stitching whatever I want. So just like free motion quilting, I'm going to stitch along and it's going to couch that yarn down, I hope. Okay, here we go. Okay, a couple things I want to point out to you. First off, you probably noticed the needle's going back and forth. It's only 1.5 in the width, so it's not going, a huge amount, but it's going just back and forth because it has to stay inside that little hole there, right? So it can't be like a 3 or 4 width. Secondly, you notice I'm moving fairly slow. You want to do that. You don't want to go racing along using this technique, or it might miss catching the yarn. I'm using a white thread right now on the top, but I would suggest you either use an invisible thread or you use a thread that matches the color of your yarn. Okay, I'm just going to lock my stitches here, go back and forth a little bit, and then cut my thread. So one thing that you want to note is it's going to cut my thread, but it's not going to cut my yarn, right? So my thread's loose, but not my yarn, okay? So I can either take that out or just leave it in and continue on. So I'm looking at this. I see I've missed a little bit there at one point. Usually it doesn't do that on me, but it did this time. And there's the back, so you can see just all you're going to see is your stitches on the back like you normally would for free motion quilting. So if you need to, you can adjust the tension a little bit. This seems to be doing not too bad. I might go just a little bit less on it, but that's up to you and depending on what you're couching down. Okay, so as I said, you want to practice on that. Go slow. Match your thread color to whatever thread or yarn you are using to couch down so that you don't see the thread that's couching it, right? Or you can use invisible thread. And so I told you at the beginning that I would give you some examples of how to use this, and also that I would give you some examples of designs that where you can get design ideas on how to use couching. So I want to show you that next. So I have some ideas for you where you can get shapes that you can couch. So cookie cutters, right? You could take cookie cutters, you could draw them. I like to use a friction pen, and you can just draw the shapes on your fabric. The nice thing about these, of course, is that they will iron right off. So I'm not being overly careful with my drawing here. As you can see, I need to connect that one up a little bit better there. But the nice thing about doing this is, as I said, these will erase afterwards. So you don't have to hit the line exactly when you're couching, but it gives you a guideline, right? Now, when we're talking about the cookie cutters, You want to keep in mind what type of threads you're couching, because if you're using a really thick thread, like if you're using yarn, like I was just showing you, a small design, or a small cookie cutter, I should say, like this, which would be a small design, isn't going to work very well, okay? So you want something that's bigger, okay? Bigger shapes. Again, you've got the star. That would probably work. Anything smaller than that, I probably would not do. So if you're looking at cookie cutters, make sure you have bigger ones that aren't intricate little shapes, okay? Something else you can use if you're into ruler work is you can use some ruler templates. So I have a set here. This is a Spinifex 11. This is a 3.5 inch ruler work template. I just need to move my helper off here so I can get the rest of my fabric. There we go. That's better. So you can put this on, and I like to use these stitching line discs. These are from Sew Steady. And so what I will do is I will take this, and let's say I want to, depends, this will give you a different shape depending on which way you want to go. So you can either mark a grid on your project if you want, just like you would do for ruler work, but you don't necessarily have to. Sometimes you can just line it up with seams and it works too. But what I did is actually, and I'm going to show you an example in just a moment here, is I used the stitching line disc to mimic where the stitching normally would be. You don't have to do this. You could just do it with the design without the stitching line disc, but it's not going to give you the same type of shape. So play around with that a bit. But you could find the center of whatever area you want to work with. Just go around and trace this. Okay, then you can move it. I would keep my pen down there. In my case, when you go to work, you would actually have your needle down there. And you would go like this. So you can see the kind of design. You could do that as many times around as you wanted to. If you do it without the stitching line disc, it's going to give you a totally different look. You mean you maybe like this, but maybe you don't. Maybe you prefer the sharp points. And again, when you're doing the couching, you're probably not going to get a super sharp point, but don't worry about that. It's just the design idea that you're going to get. So I want to show you how this works. And by the way, when you were doing this, you could, if you wanted to, actually do the ruler work on your project and then couch over it. The reason I don't do that, and I would do it with the friction pen, is because if you're couching and you miss some of those already stitched lines, you're going to see them. So with the friction pen and drawing it on your project first and then couching over it, if you miss some of those lines, it doesn't really matter because you're not going to see that later on when you erase those marks. So let's go back to the machine and let me show you what a project looks like when that couching is done on, and actually how I do that couching too. So I'm back at the machine, and what I did is I actually took this Spinifex 11, an 11.5 inch size, and I drew it onto my projects, just like I had just shown you a few minutes ago. And I have done most of it, but I want to show you how this works for the last little bit here. So you can see where I've got this drawn here, and I'm just following it along as best I can. So I have most of it done. Let's just finish it up, shall we? Making sure I've got lots of yarn over here. And taking my time. And so if you're wondering how I'm following that line, I'm kind of putting the center of the foot along the line, roughly anyway, because as you know, the zigzag's going back and forth. And just take your time. Okay, now at this point, I'm going to go back the other way. So I'm actually moving my project around because I need to see where I'm going. It's easiest to do it this way, I find, if you can. Now I'm just going to lock my stitches like I would if I was free motion quilting. A little bit of back and forth. Cut my threads. And then of course I have to cut my yarn. And so you can see what it looks like here. So this is a Spinifex 11.5 inch design. I just decided to do 4 quadrants here, as it were. And you can see here where I've gone away from my traced lines. It doesn't really matter because when I take them off, they're going to look just fine. And I'm going to do that now and show you the final result. So here's the final project. I couched down some yarn on it. I think it turned out really well. It gives some extra texture to a very simple project. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified the next time I release a new video. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.